Hello and welcome to Real Deals' latest podcast in association with Drax Executive. I'm Talia Masiri, editor of Real Deals, and today I have the pleasure of hosting this session in conversation with Matthew Finnie, Chief Technology Officer at Drax Executive. Matthew has over 30 years of operational and executive experience with use of technology to transform industries. He has a broad range of in-depth expertise across different sectors from hardware, software, and service provider industries, developed through the early application of internet and enterprise networking to the development of cloud-based platforms and enterprise digital transformation. Hi, Matthew. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Talia. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Great. So in this session, we will focus on the key considerations and concerns around leadership due diligence. So Matthew, to start, perhaps you could tell me, why is leadership diligence important for deal makers?
I think diligence is important for deal makers, largely for two reasons. One is, there's the kind of obvious reason. You're investing a lot of money in a organization and a business. At the end of the day, the leaders are the people who you're trusting to steer that investment and give you the return, especially within the private equity world, where you kind of have a very defined outcome, right? You invest and you're looking to return something to the fund in, say, a 5-year horizon. And so understanding the effectiveness of leaders within that context is super important to achieving your value creation plan.
Definitely. But just to be a bit kind of controversial here, clearly private equity is doing well and has a proven model, at the same time as kind of little attention being paid to leadership diligence. So kind of, I think a recent report mentioned that only less than 1% of fees across deals are being allocated to this up until now. So why is this, and does this really need to change in your view?
I think there's two things. I think the reason such a small amount of fees go into it is actually really quite hard, and it's also if you're buying something, you're buying an organization. I've been on both sides of the table. It's one thing being told they don't like your business, right? They don't think what you've done is particularly good, or your strategy sucks, etc. It's an entirely different thing saying that actually I don't think you're very good, or you're not in the right role, or I'm not sure you're going to be part of the journey, and this kind of thing. Oh, but we'd still like to buy you, right? The challenge for the buyer is that you kind of at some level want to understand as much as you can about the business, and hence why there are huge amounts of attention on financial, legal, commercial due diligence. Leadership is harder, right? One, it's a less exact science as it stands today. And secondly, you kind of in this slight bind that you want to keep the management on side, such that if it does come down to a competitive bidding situation, that you're not going to get rejected because you don't take the management with you. But you also want to make sure that as soon as you do the transaction, you're in a position to make the changes you need to change if you need to make them.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a fine balance there, as you say, in terms of not wanting to offend the management team in order to be able to kind of get the deal done, but also being able to have those conversations and perhaps critique, but in a kind of an effective way. Would you say, in your opinion, then private equity firms have shied away from this in the past? I
just think no one's really, I don't think it's private equity firms per se. I think it's management teams within companies. It's in general, no one's, you're as good as your track record, right? And, it's a lot of it's based on the fact, have you done this before? Yes, you have. Okay, I can see that. Great, right? You're the guy. And to your earlier point, private equity's been very successful and done a lot of deals, and this hasn't really risen, become a huge factor. I think I think there's, it partly isn't a huge factor because no one has got a really good way of dealing with it in the initial phase. And I think the other thing is it somewhat does depend on the asset and the deal, how much in some cases, let's be completely honest, right? People are buying an asset, and it'd be great if the management team are great and come with it. And in other cases, they're like, that's that's something I can deal with. I can change that. I can move it around as I wish. A lot of it depends on the business. The closer you get to kind of a venture type model in terms of the business, more nascent in terms of strategy, the more reliant you are at some level on the team. If you've got a big mature business in a large sector that is well defined, and you're using a value creation plan, which is, I don't know, leveraging a balance sheet or something, then maybe the impact of the management team, whilst is always going to be there, is probably not as acute as in other areas.
Yeah, I guess it's quite kind of dependent on the type of business and the size of the business there, and perhaps how mature it is as well. And I definitely want to get on to looking at your views, Matthew, on what characteristics and how deal makers should go about assessing those. But just before that, I'm interested in understanding kind of what is leading this type of diligence. So what is kind of bringing leadership diligence up on the agenda? What's causing kind of greater focus on it?
Well, I think one of the things is, if you look at all the sophistication we've had over the last number of years in understanding businesses, modeling businesses, understanding markets, and even modeling markets to a lesser or greater extent, I think we've got better and better at doing that. And I think there was a recent Bain report that captured on a survey of a bunch of fund leaders, and they said, well, what is the most important thing for deal success? And they said the management team. And what is the biggest cause of failure in an exit? And they said just slightly below, in a very close second, was management team. So all of a sudden, you fix a whole bunch of things, and this one is now the one that is most material when you're coming into it. Because it's a process. It's a process. If you go way back 20 years, there was a lot of inefficiency in businesses, but as we've got smarter and better, you kind of move those things out. And I think we're at the point where you can have quite sophisticated businesses, but you are still reliant on the management team, and you're still reliant on that being in the right place and having the right level of flexibility to, one, execute on your value creation plan, but to deal with changes in the market and disruptions as and when they come.
Yeah. From your view, would you say it's kind of quite easy to pinpoint where a management team may perhaps be letting a business down? I
wouldn't say it's easy. If it was easy, people would have done it, bluntly. I think it's about the issue with it is there's no kind of absolute. If you look at, most of the time when people look at leaders, they're looking at their sector experience, or, for want of a better word, domain experience.
Yeah.
But conversely, there are good examples of domains or sectors that have got, if you like, kind of sluggish in the lack of transformation, and they become ripe for disruption. And we've seen it in multiple sectors. We've seen it with things like advertising. We've seen it in the industry I came from, which was, cloud and infrastructure.
Yeah.
Is that the people who should benefit from the changes in the market and technology don't, because their incumbent domain mentality is actually adverse. Whereas what you want is someone who comes in with completely fresh eyes and says, well, guys, I don't know why you do it this way.
Yeah.
And then you'll get the flip side of it, where other industries where it's all about domain knowledge, right? And so, that's a key thing. So it is highly dependent on, the way we think about it, and the way you think about a leader in themselves is dependent on their domain experience, their sector experience. The situation, which is your value creation plan. What is it you're trying to do? What is your hypothesis? What is the thesis you're trying to execute on? What is going on in the market, for example? Their relevant experiences, their relevant experience within the context of the team. For example, I've mostly been in kind of CTO type roles and product roles. My job largely is to change an organization. So it's a very situationally biased function, as opposed to, say, someone who's a sales leader, which is understanding a customer set, which is more the main bias. So it is variable, not just within the context of the market you're in, but also value creation plan, the state of the market in terms of its own internal transformation, and also then what your investment thesis is.
Yeah, definitely. So quite a few factors to consider there. But with this, Matthew, kind of what features and characteristics would you say a successful management team comprises of? And can this be measured across the board, or again, is it likely to be dependent on the type of business? What should deal makers be looking for?
I think there are some things, there's some hygiene factors which are just, it's a that if they're there, then they give you a sense of comfort. And one is what we refer to as functional balance. Do you have the right functional diversity in the team? And in a very, very simple sense, you can argue that you've got a kind of tactical day-to-day business, which is largely your, if you like, your revenue function to your operational function, delivering and executing on the day-to-day operations of the business. You've got some kind of change function, and that's nominally what the CTO should be doing in the context of using, in that case, technology to reduce your engagement with the market and also how you deliver. And then a CFO who is going to kind of tell you the truth, kind of thing. You don't want an enthusiastically creative, if you like, in the sort of curious way CFO. You want someone who, when everyone else is really excited, is going to kind of, in some ways, bring you down to earth. But generally speaking, you set yourself up with the right level of functional diversity, behavioral complementarity, and diversity, so that within the scheme of internal and external factors that may not be able to be predicted, you've got the flexibility to execute on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. But kind of that diversity there, as you say, then, and kind of having each role really demonstrating their expertise in their certain field and the skills and characteristics associated with those roles, perhaps is something you should be looking out for. But clearly, the certain deal processes can move very quickly. Decisions have to be made, but again, you can't exactly, like we're on a video call now, you can't exactly get a complete view of someone from a quick interaction. So how can deal makers gain more than just a snapshot of a management team and their dynamic?
In truth, you can, right?
Okay.
And you've got to say, well, how good is it at the moment? And it's like the famous comment on advertising, 50% of my advertising works really well. The problem is I just don't know which 50%.
Yeah.
And in terms of most of the kind of leadership diligence that goes on, I don't know. I think if you said 50%, most people will go, yeah, probably. We would feel, even on a kind of arm's length remote view, that the kind of methods and platforms that we're developing would just on straight out of the box, and it's a few minutes of a look will give you a kind of 60% kind of sniff test. Okay. It looks sort of like that, because what a lot of you're doing is you're combining different facets, not just, for example, a lot of people, when they look at skills and this, they drill into skills. I've got 6,000 different variables for skills, which is fantastic. But if the error on that is 10, 20, 30%, 6,000 is sort of irrelevant. What this is giving you 4 different facets across 4 or 5 different perspectives. And therefore, what you do, you get a quick comparative view, which in our minds is going to be just a first headline, gives you an objective view of what's going on. And if nothing else, it allows at an investor level to kind of codify or give you a language about what it is may feel
Yeah.
needs to change within the management team, and
Sure.
allows you to be objective as opposed to, as we mentioned earlier, emotional about it.
Yeah, exactly. But can you gain a true view of the dynamic of the team? So clearly you can make your decisions on the different roles and assess different people within the team, but how can you assess the dynamic between them?
Well, it's a process. It's not, we have a predictive behavior model, which is sort of grounded in fairly well trodden sort of competencies and skills psychology, and lots of people, there's been a lot of work and done on it. So we've sort of applied that as a predictive level, and it gives you a good, a good guide, and at some level, I've always been more or less in the same role, right? Yeah. And that's largely because of my thinking style, right? Sure. Psychologically, they talk about flow state, which is you like consistency with doing things that you like doing, that you're good at, right? And so we naturally converge to our natural position. And at some level, if you like, not, at a leadership level, to get to that level, to be operating at that point, you've got to be operating at a fairly high level of intensity and performance output. And therefore it's, at some level, it's very unlikely you're not going to sit there and go, do you know what, I'd much rather have been doing that job all these years. Yeah. So there's an element of that. But what happens then is it's a process of then getting actual biodata. And so there's an applied psychometric model, which is based on analyzing, largest kind of its study actually, analyzing the behaviors of leaders in private equity over the last 10 years and picking out those particular elements about what are the things and what are the mix and diversity of behaviors and traits and amplifiers that you need in order to be successful within this particular environment.
Really interesting, great. And Matthew, to finish, have you got any words of wisdom or any advice to private equity deal makers who perhaps haven't really considered leadership diligence that much so far and are looking to kind of consider it more so going forward?
I think the simple thing is to try it and see if it works. Yeah.
Why so?
The proof of the pudding is in the eating. I can speculate and tell them, persuade people all I like, but these, there are models, and we have one which is in a form that you can kind of digest it in a kind of almost like taster manner, and you can say, well, okay, it just seems to work, and then you get deeper and deeper. Yeah. But yeah, no, try it. It's we're the beneficiaries in a lot of this, of a lot of the availability of a lot of the technology and the ability to collect and collate and calculate this stuff on the fly. But also, I think within the case of Drax, it's also having the kind of vision to say, well, how do I know there's a lot of data analytics models out there, and there's a lot of machine learning type models out there. Yeah. But intuitively, how do I take that kind of intuitive understanding, which exists in the minds of people who've done this for 10, 15, 20 years, and how do I model that? And I think that's one of the things that we've successfully overlaid it, especially within the context of the applied psychometric model, which is PACE.
Really interesting. Great. Thanks, Matthew. So Matthew, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And if our listeners have any further questions around leadership diligence, we do encourage them to get in touch with you and to hopefully hear more. But for now, thanks again, Matthew, and thank you for everyone for listening.